They say the best revenge is living well. I'd like to offer a small correction to that. The best revenge is sitting across a dinner table from the people who came to destroy you, letting them lay out every card they have, and then quietly showing them yours. Welcome to Dad's Silent Revenge. Get comfortable, grab something to drink, and remember, every single person in this story had a choice. They just made the wrong one. Drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed. You are going to want to stay for this one. Here's the thing nobody tells you about real money. It has absolutely nothing to prove. I drive a 2004 Chevy Silverado with a dent above the rear left wheel well that I keep saying I'll get fixed and never do. I wear a Timex watch I bought at a drugstore in 2009 because it tells time, takes a beating, and doesn't need to be charged overnight like some kind of expensive houseplant. I shop at the same hardware store I've shopped at for 20 years, and the guy at the register still calls me Bobby without knowing he's talking to the man who owns the building 3 blocks over. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 24 years I have owned and operated Callaway Ridge Logistics, a supply chain and distribution company that moves product across 16 states, employs just under 3,500 people, and last year turned a number that would genuinely rearrange your understanding of what a man in a flannel shirt and muddy work boots is capable of building. I live in a modest house in Harlan, Kentucky, on a half-acre lot where I grow tomatoes every summer and lose every argument with a deer about whether those tomatoes belong to me or to them. Walk up to me on a Saturday morning pulling weeds in my front yard, and you would hand me a business card for a landscaping service before you'd offer me a boardroom seat. That is precisely the way I have always wanted it. Now, my daughter Claire, God gave her my stubbornness and her mother's judgment, which is a combination that makes her both exceptional and completely exhausting in equal measure. She is sharp and warm, and has a laugh that can change the temperature of a room. When she brought a man named Marcus Whitfield home for the first time 2 Thanksgivings ago, I shook his hand, looked him straight in the eye, and had a single clear thought. This man has never been genuinely challenged by anything in his entire life. You can always recognize it. There's a particular kind of ease that comes from a world that has always arranged itself around you, that has always said yes, that has never made you wait for anything important. Marcus wasn't a bad man. I told myself that repeatedly and sincerely. He was intelligent, well put together, instinctive in a way that couldn't be taught. When I quietly ran him through every background and financial check available to a man with my resources. Yes, I ran a full check on my daughter's boyfriend, and no, I am not the least bit sorry about it. His numbers were solid. His track record was clean. His instincts were sharp. So when Claire told me she was serious about him, I did something I had never done in 24 years of running my own company. I made a decision from the heart. I created a position at Callaway Ridge that didn't previously exist. I had my executive team recruit Marcus through a legitimate search firm. I had him interview with my board, compete against real candidates, and earn the role on his actual merits. I just made sure the door was open. He had no idea whose door it was. As far as Marcus Whitfield knew, he had been headhunted for a senior VP role at a respected logistics company, interviewed fairly, and been offered the position because he was the best candidate, which, honestly, he was. I just happened to be the man who owned the company he was interviewing with. Claire knew. I told her the night I made the decision, sitting at my kitchen table over 2 cups of coffee. She stared at me for a long, quiet moment. Dad, she said finally, do you understand that this is completely unhinged? I prefer to think of it as thorough. I told her. She gave me the look. Every father with a daughter knows the exact look I am describing. The one that says I love you unconditionally, and I am deeply concerned about your mental state. For 16 months, things were genuinely good. Marcus ran his division well, better than I had anticipated, which was simultaneously gratifying and slightly irritating, because it meant Claire had better instincts about people than I'd given her credit for, and I wasn't entirely ready to concede that out loud. Then one Wednesday evening in April, Marcus called me, not as a son-in-law, the way he always called me, warm, respectful, that particular careful warmth young ambitious men use when they think they're speaking to someone's harmless older relative. Robert, he said, my parents are in town this weekend. Dad has been asking about you for a while now. Would you come to dinner? Just family. Nothing formal. Something moved in my chest when he said that. Not alarm exactly. More like the feeling you get when a piece of music sounds familiar, but you can't quite name the song. He's been asking about me, I said. There was a pause. Half a second too long. You know how parents are, Marcus said. They want to know who their son married into. My gut was already talking. It had been since the word parents came out of his mouth. But I have spent 30 years walking toward the things my instincts flag instead of away from them. Sure, I said. Tell me where. The restaurant was called Harrington's. The kind of place where the menu comes without prices. The lighting is low enough that you feel like you're being trusted with something, and the staff introduces themselves with eye contact that's been professionally calibrated. I wore my cleanest flannel on purpose, and I did not feel a single moment of self-consciousness about it. Because a man who built what I built doesn't need a jacket that costs $2,000 to feel like himself. Marcus met me at the door. Fresh haircut, dark blazer, looking every inch the executive he genuinely was. He glanced at my shirt for exactly 1/2 second, and to his credit, to his real and genuine credit, he didn't flinch. You look good, he said. I found parking on the first try, I said. Good night, so far. He laughed. I didn't. Inside, Warren and Patricia Whitfield were already seated. Now I need you to understand something about the way people behave when they are carrying something they know is wrong. They overcorrect. The warmth arrives before the occasion earns it. The smile is already assembled when you walk in, which means it was prepared before you got there. Warren Whitfield stood and shook my hand with both of his. The double-handed shake. In my experience, that gesture means either you are deeply sincere or you are deeply strategic, and the distinction usually reveals itself within the first 20 minutes. Robert, he said, we have heard so much about you. Please, sit down. Patricia touched my arm immediately and told me I looked wonderfully relaxed, which is a Harrington's way of noting the flannel shirt and deciding it isn't a threat. Good. Let them think that. We ordered. We made conversation. Marcus talked about work carefully around me the way he always had, keeping details vague out of what he assumed was professional discretion. Warren asked about my place in Harlan, which Claire had apparently mentioned. I told him I fought a losing battle with deer over tomatoes every summer. He nodded the way people nod when their mind is already somewhere else. Then approximately 40 minutes in, right between the entrees and the moment I had almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing, Warren Whitfield reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He produced an envelope, off-white, heavy stock. Thick, the kind of envelope that did not come from any office supply store. He placed it on the table in front of me with a deliberateness that was almost ceremonial, the way you set something down when you need the other person to understand that what's inside carries weight. He folded his hands. Patricia lifted her wine glass. And Marcus, this is the part one kept returning to for a long time afterward. Marcus looked down at his plate. Robert, Warren said, his voice dropping just enough to signal that small talk was officially over. There are some things about your past, about how you built what you built, that we feel deserve an honest conversation. I looked at the envelope. I looked at Warren. I looked at Marcus, who was examining his dinner plate like it contained the answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. And I thought, there it is. 24 years of building. 24 years of silence. 24 years of believing that what happened with Leonard Briggs was settled and buried and done. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, set it down with a quiet, deliberate click. Warren, I said, before I open that envelope, I think there's something you should know about me. He smiled, the patient, certain smile of a man who believes he is holding every card at the table. I'm listening, he said. I leaned forward slightly. I never sit down at a table I haven't already prepared for. The envelope sat between us on that white tablecloth, like a grenade. And nobody at that table, not Warren, not Patricia, not even Marcus, knew yet which one of us was already holding the pen. I did not open the envelope immediately. That matters. That is the whole game right there in one decision. Because Warren Whitfield had spent what was clearly a significant amount of time engineering this moment. The restaurant, the timing, the placement of that envelope, the way Patricia had her wine glass ready, the way Marcus had been positioned at the table. This was not a dinner. This was a production. And productions only work when the other person follows a script that was written for them. I had not read that script, and I had no intention of performing in it. So I picked up my fork, cut into my chicken, chewed slowly, and let the silence settle over that table like weather, like something that had moved in and intended to stay a while. Patricia shifted in her seat, the smallest movement, but I caught it. Warren's patient smile developed a hairline crack along the left side. Marcus still hadn't looked up. I counted 40 seconds, 50, a full minute of silence at a table that had been carefully set for confrontation. Then I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin, and reached for the envelope. Inside were documents, photocopied but organized with a kind of precise, deliberate neatness that tells you a careful person spent real time on this. The kind of neatness that says someone believes these pages are important enough to deserve sharp edges and clean lines. I didn't read through them immediately. I didn't need to, because the moment my eyes found the name at the top of the first page, my entire chest went simultaneously cold and completely calm. Leonard Briggs. Let me tell you about Leonard Briggs. In 1993, Leonard Briggs and I were 27 years old, broke in a specific way that only young men with enormous ambition and no capital can be broke, and we had a plan. A small logistics operation out of Lexington. Nothing that would make any headlines. Moving freight for regional manufacturers who needed a reliable partner and couldn't afford the big national firms yet. The kind of business that doesn't get written about, but keeps the world moving. For 3 years, we built it side by side. And for 3 years, I looked past every sign that Leonard was not who I believed him to be. He was stealing, not dramatically, not all at once. The way water works through a foundation, quietly, patiently, finding every small crack until damage is structural and you don't discover it until the whole thing shifts under your feet. By 1996, Leonard had been diverting money from our joint operating accounts into a separate entity, a competing firm he had been quietly building using client relationships he had cultivated entirely on my contacts, my reputation, and my work. When I found out, I did not respond with noise. I went very, very still. I spent 5 months documenting everything, every transaction, every diverted contract, every communication where Leonard discussed his plan in writing like a man who believed he would never be caught. And when the file was complete, when it was thorough enough to end him in a courtroom without breaking a sweat, I sat across from Leonard Briggs in that same Lexington office where we had started, and I gave him exactly one choice. Walk away, dissolve the competing firm, sign over his remaining stake in everything we had built together, and disappear quietly. Or I walk everything I have directly to the district attorney's office, and he spends the better part of the next decade explaining himself to a jury and a judge. Leonard Briggs chose to disappear. I rebuilt alone, starting from a foundation that was smaller than it should have been, but completely mine. And I told myself I would never again make the mistake of trusting someone simply because I wanted to believe in them. What I had no way of knowing, what I could not have possibly anticipated, was that Leonard Briggs had a younger brother, 14 years younger, a boy who was 13 years old when all of this happened, a boy who grew up in the shadow of a broken man, who spent the rest of his life telling a story in which he was the victim and I was the villain, a boy who never once heard the other side because the other side wasn't available in the version Leonard told, a boy named Warren. I set the pages down on the table carefully, squared the edges, looked up. Warren was watching me with the focused, concentrated attention of a man who has been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. Where did these come from? I asked. My voice was completely level. Leonard kept his own records, Warren said. Everything you did to him, the ultimatums, the threats, the way you forced him out of something he helped build from the ground up. I nodded slowly. And you've been sitting on these for how long? Long enough, he said. Leonard passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He died with practically nothing, Robert. Nothing. Because of what you took from him. And there it was. The grief underneath the architecture of the whole thing. The real thing, buried under all the strategy in the envelope and the carefully chosen restaurant. A younger brother who had watched an older brother die broken and bitter and full of a story that had only ever had one narrator. I want to be honest with you right now. I felt that, a genuine, quiet ache for the version of the story that Warren Whitfield had been living inside of, because he believed it completely. Every word of it. He had built his entire understanding of justice around it. Warren, I said carefully, I am genuinely sorry about your brother. I don't want your condolences. His voice had an edge now, polished away underneath the dinner party finish, but present. I understand that. What is it you want? He leaned forward. His voice dropped to the register people use when they want you to understand that what they're saying is final. I want you to step back from any active role at Callaway Ridge. Formally and completely. I want a financial settlement paid to my family as restitution for what Leonard lost and what our family was never given. The number is in that envelope, and I want it handled quietly before my son's name gets attached to whatever comes next if you choose to be difficult about it. And that was the moment Marcus Whitfield finally looked up. I want to be precise about what I saw on his face, because it matters to everything that follows. It was not the face of a man who had organized this. It was not the face of a conspirator. It was the face of a man who had been told this was a family dinner and was now sitting in the wreckage of that understanding with no map and no cover. There was color rising in his jaw. His eyes moved from his father to me and back again with a rapid, uncomfortable movement of someone doing the math on a situation they had walked into voluntarily, and were only now fully calculating. "Dad," Marcus started. "Marcus." Warren's voice was a closed door, solid and final. Marcus closed his mouth. I watched that exchange, and I held on to it carefully. Filed it away in the part of my mind that has been reading rooms for 30 years. "How long have you known?" I asked Marcus directly. He looked at his father, then back at me. "Marcus," I said, "I'm asking you." "Not him. You." He exhaled slowly, rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. The gesture of a man trying to find a way to tell the truth without knowing yet how much it's going to cost him. I knew there was some kind of history between our families. He said, "Dad told me when Claire," and I got serious. He said there was something unresolved. "A debt." He said being close to you was he stopped himself. "Was what?" I said quietly. He didn't answer, which was its own answer. Patricia chose this precise moment to place her hand over mine on the table with a warmth so carefully constructed I nearly looked for the seams in it. "Robert," she said, her voice soft and measured, "this doesn't have to be difficult. We are family now. This is simply about making something right that was left wrong for too long." I looked at her hand on mine. I looked at her face, at the smile that had been fully assembled and waiting since before I walked through the door of this restaurant. "Patricia," I said pleasantly, "I need you to listen to what I'm about to say very carefully." She kept the smile in place. "Here's the thing about a man who has been doing this for 30 years. You do not walk into a room that your gut spent an entire week warning you about without doing your homework first. You do not sit down at a table like this empty-handed, not when a name from your past is somewhere in the vicinity, not when the invitation carries that particular weight that tells you it is not actually an invitation. I had made my own calls. I reached into my jacket and placed my own envelope on the table, smaller than Warren's, plain white, completely unremarkable looking, the kind of envelope that doesn't announce itself. Warren's eyes dropped to it immediately. "Leonard's records are incomplete," I said, which makes a certain kind of sense. A man constructing a narrative for his own protection tends to keep only the pages that support his version of events. The rest has a way of disappearing. I let that sit for exactly 1 second. What I have here are the original operating account records from our joint business between 1994 and 1996. The withdrawal patterns. The wire transfers into a holding company registered under a name that was not Leonard's and not mine. The written communications, including several in which Leonard outlined his plan to duplicate our entire client list and launch competing operation using the infrastructure we had built together with my capital and my relationships. I paused. I also have a signed statement from a man named Gary Tuck, who served as Leonard's private accountant during that period. He is 68 years old, in excellent health, and entirely willing to speak to what he processed on Leonard's direct instructions. The table went quiet in a way that was different from before. Warren's face had changed. The patient, prepared confidence was gone. In its place was something unguarded and raw, something that looked underneath the anger like genuine grief. The grief of a man watching the story he has built his entire sense of justice around developed cracks in real time. "You threatened him," Warren said. His voice had lost its dinner finish entirely. "You cornered him and forced him out." "I gave him a choice," I said. "The same choice the law would have given him, with considerably less public exposure attached to it. What Leonard did with that choice was entirely his own decision. I did not make it for him." Warren stood up, not with drama, just a slow, heavy rise of a man whose body had made a decision slightly ahead of his mind. "Sit down, Warren," I said quietly. "Please, because this conversation is not finished, and the part that remains is the part that actually matters. It is about your son." Warren stood for a moment longer. Then he sat back down. And for the first time since I had walked to the door of Harrington's, I saw something move across Warren Whitfield's face that was not performance, and was not strategy, and was not the rehearsed confidence of a man who had spent years preparing for this moment. It was shame, the real kind, the kind that arrives when you finally see yourself from the outside. I turned to Marcus. "I need you to hear what I'm about to say." I told him, not as Claire's father, not as anyone with a title or a position, just as a man talking honestly to another man for the first time since you sat down at this table. He looked at me steadily, nodded once. I leaned forward. "I know exactly who you are, Marcus. I have known since before you ever walked through my daughter's front door. And what I'm going to tell you right now is going to rearrange your understanding of the last 16 months of your life entirely." The waiter materialized at the edge of the table with the bright, oblivious energy of a man who had been waiting for what he believed was the right moment. "Can I interest the table in anything?" Dessert, perhaps? All four of us looked at him simultaneously. He took one careful step backward and disappeared. Marcus Whitfield was about to discover that the quiet man in the flannel shirt sitting across from him was not a guest in his world. He was the one who had built it. I want to tell you something about the word reveal. People have a particular idea about what a reveal looks like. They picture raised voices and pointed fingers, and someone knocking a glass over on the way out. They have seen too many movies, and not enough real life. In my experience, the most devastating reveals happen in the quietest voices, the ones that don't need any volume, because the words themselves carry enough weight to pin a man to his chair without a single dramatic gesture. I poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip, set it down, and I began. Marcus, I said, tell me what you know about how you got your job. He straightened slightly, the automatic, unconscious assembling of composure that I had watched him deploy in boardrooms for 16 months. The executive reflex. It was, even in that moment, genuinely impressive. I was recruited, he said. Professional search firm reached out. I went through a full interview process. Competed against other candidates. The board made the offer. That's all accurate, I said. Every word of it. Your performance in those interviews was strong. Your instincts were exactly what that role needed. I want you to hold on to that part, because it is completely true, and it is going to matter in a few minutes. He looked at me carefully. What do you mean, hold on to it? I said slowly and clearly, that the search firm that recruited you was hired by me. The board you interviewed with reports to me, the role you have held for the last 16 months, the one with the office on the 14th floor, the car allowance, the compensation package that I know precisely because I personally approved every line of it. That role exists inside a company that I've owned entirely for 24 years. The frown came first, a small, precise line between his eyebrows. Then it deepened. Then it stopped. Then his face did something I can only describe as a controlled collapse. Like a man who has been handed information that his mind recognizes as significant before his emotions have fully caught up to what it means. A slow, complete system shut down. He started. Robert Calloway, I said, founder and sole owner of Callaway Ridge Logistics. The ridge in the name was a reference to the property outside Harlan, where I signed the original incorporation papers at my kitchen table in 1999. I kept it because I never wanted to forget where I started or what it cost me to get there. I let that land. You have been running my company, Marcus, reporting to my executives, signing off on my contracts, sitting in a chair that I created and placed you in because I wanted to know who my daughter was serious about, and I wanted to know it from watching you work rather than from a conversation over a holiday dinner. Complete silence. Warren had sat back down at some point during this. I hadn't noticed when. He looked like a man watching something he'd spent years constructing quietly folding on itself, floor by floor, in slow and perfect sequence. Why? Marcus said it plainly. The boardroom finish was entirely gone. This was just a man asking a genuine question from somewhere honest and unprepared. Why would you do it that way? Patricia made a sound beside me. Half scoff, half something else. So this entire thing has been a setup? She said. All of it. You manipulated our son's entire career. I turned to her with a patience I want you to understand was completely genuine. Patricia, I said, I gave your son a real job at a real company with real responsibilities and real consequences. He has performed exceptionally in that role for 16 months without any special treatment, without anyone making allowances for who he was married to, and without knowing whose name was on the deed. I didn't manipulate his career. I observed it. She had no answer for that. I turned back to Marcus. I gave him a moment. What I had just handed him was a significant amount of weight, and I am not a man who enjoys cruelty. I wanted him to find his footing before the next part, because the next part required a decision from him, and decisions made while a man is still in freefall are rarely the ones he stands behind later. He sat with it, both hands flat on the tablecloth, eyes down, breathing steady. I watched him process it the way I had watched him process difficult information in boardroom settings, methodically, without panic. Then he looked at his father. And what I saw move across Marcus Whitfield's face in that moment was something I had not anticipated and was not prepared for. Not confusion, not embarrassment, not the scrambling of a man trying to reassemble a story that no longer made sense. Something colder than all of those things. Something clarifying. How long? He said to Warren. Quiet, direct, the voice of a man who has already done the math and is simply asking for confirmation. Warren said nothing. Dad. Marcus's voice had an edge I had genuinely never heard from him before. How long have you known who Robert was? Warren adjusted his cufflinks. A delay so transparent, it was almost painful to witness. I began to suspect when you first mentioned the company name. Warren said finally, Callaway Ridge. Leonard had mentioned the name Callaway to me years ago. When you told me where you were working, I did some research. When I told you where I was working, Marcus repeated. He said each word separately, letting the weight of them settle one at a time. Meaning before Claire, and I got engaged. I was protecting our family, Warren said. You positioned me. Marcus said it the way you state a fact. Flat and precise, and without any room for interpretation. You found out who I was working for, and you decided it was useful. You let things with Claire progress. You encouraged it, because you thought I was your way in. Patricia reached for her son's hand across the table. Sweetheart, your Uncle Leonard deserved. Don't. Marcus pulled his hand back. The single word landed like a door closing. Don't bring Leonard into this right now. I stayed completely still, because what was happening across that table had stopped being about me. It had become something between a son and a father. And the right thing to do in that moment, the only right thing, was nothing at all. Some conversations have to run their own course. Warren tried a different approach. The father voice, the one that comes out when logic and strategy have both failed, and the only tool left is emotional weight. Everything I did was for this family, Clayton. Everything. That man took Leonard's future away from him. From all of us. You were finally close enough to do something about it, and I. To do what exactly? Marcus's voice cracked on the question, and then hardened immediately after, the way it does when someone refuses to let emotion finish a sentence out loud. Help you extort my father-in-law? Use Claire's family to settle a 30-year grudge over a story that, based on what Robert just put on this table, was never even complete truth? Warren had no answer for that. Not a single word. I picked up my water glass again, mostly to give my hands something neutral to do. Outside, the windows of Harrington's the city moved along completely indifferent to what was happening at this particular table, which felt about right. After a long moment, Marcus turned back to me. His face was composed now, deliberate. The expression he wore walking into difficult situations where the outcome was uncertain, but the effort had to be complete regardless. It was, I realized with quiet pride I kept entirely to myself, the face of a man who was genuinely good at his job. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't, I said. He frowned slightly. You didn't have the full picture. I told him. I made choices that kept it from you. Some of those choices I'd make again. Some of them I'd do differently. But you don't owe me an apology for walking into a situation you didn't have complete information about. He was quiet for a moment. I knew something was wrong about tonight. He said, before we even sat down. Something about the way Dad talked about this dinner all week. I felt it, and I came anyway, and I sat here while he put that envelope in front of you, and I looked at my plate. He paused. That's not who I want to be. I looked at him for a long, steady moment. No, I said, it isn't. And the fact that you know that, the fact that you can name it clearly while you're still sitting at the table where it happened, is exactly why you still have a job on Monday morning. Something moved across his face. Relief trying to carry itself with dignity. Doing a reasonable job of it. I turned to Warren. He lifted his chin. The final posture of a man who has lost a hand completely and has not quite finished pretending otherwise. Those documents you brought tonight, I said, nodding toward the cream envelope still sitting untouched on the table between us, are incomplete, selectively assembled, and placed alongside what I've laid out tonight. They are entirely harmless to me. I want you to understand that clearly. I want you to know that you came to this restaurant tonight, carrying what you believed was a weapon, and it turned out to be a picture of one. Warren's jaw moved. No sound came out. I'm not going to pursue anything legal against you. I continued, not because I couldn't. I could, and the case would be straightforward, but because Leonard was your brother and grief is a powerful and distorting thing, and I believe that the man sitting across from me tonight genuinely thinks he was doing something righteous. I understand that. I'm sorry for what Leonard's version of the story cost you over the years. I'm sorry you carried it for so long. Patricia's eyes had gone wet. She was looking at the tablecloth. But I need you to hear the rest of this, I said, clearly and completely. I leaned forward. Marcus is a senior executive at my company. Claire is my daughter, and as of her 26th birthday 4 months ago, a partial equity holder in that same company. Your son married into something you spent years trying to take a piece of from the outside. And the only reason any of it remains available to him, and through him to your family, is because he just showed me in the last 15 minutes that he is not willing to be used as a tool regardless of who is doing the using. I paused and let that settle fully before I continued. That is not something I take lightly, and it is not something I will forget. The silence that followed was the most valuable silence I have ever sat inside. It didn't cost me a single thing to produce. Warren Whitfield picked up his cloth napkin, folded it slowly and precisely, placed it beside his plate with the careful movements of a man who needs something to do with his hands when there is nothing left to say with his mouth. "We should go," he said to Patricia. Quietly, all the dinner party finished, entirely gone. She nodded without looking at anyone, reached for her purse. They stood. Warren paused at Marcus's shoulder. A brief, complicated pause. "Son," he started. Marcus looked straight ahead. "Later, Dad," he said. "Not tonight." The distance between those two words was wider than the restaurant. Warren and Patricia Whitfield walked out of Harrington's, and I watched them go and felt nothing theatrical about it. No triumph, no satisfaction of the loud variety. Just a quiet, settled feeling of something that has been unfinished for a very long time finally being set down in the right place. Marcus and I sat in silence for a moment. The waiter reappeared at the edge of the table with the cautious optimism of a man who had been waiting at a respectful distance and had decided the weather had finally cleared. "Dessert?" he offered carefully. Marcus looked at me. I looked at Marcus. "What's the chocolate lava cake situation?" I asked. "Exceptional," the waiter said, with the confidence of a man who believed it. "2 of those," I said. "And real coffee. Not the half-string version. The actual thing." He disappeared with visible relief. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like it had been stored since before the appetizers arrived. A long, slow exhale that changed the shape of his shoulders. "Robert," he said. "Yeah." He looked at me directly. Eye contact clean and steady. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "Always," I said. "Do you actually trust me?" He said it carefully. "Not as Claire's husband, not because of tonight or any of this. As an executive, as the person running that division. Do you actually trust my judgment?" I considered it the way the question deserved to be considered. Not quickly, not with reassurance that arrived before the thinking did. 8 months ago, I said, "You identified a bottleneck in our northern distribution network that my own operations team had missed for 2 years. You restructured the routing, renegotiated 2 carrier contracts without being asked, and presented the board with a solution that saved us just under $4 million annually. You did all of that without anyone pointing you toward the problem." I paused. "So yes, I trust your judgment. Completely." He absorbed that. But I added. He looked up. "Monday morning you and I are sitting down together. Not as owner and executive. Not as father-in-law and son-in-law. 2 men. Honest conversation. Everything on the table. No more gaps. No more quiet history operating in the background of our working relationship. Everything visible from here forward." He nodded. "Once. Firm. 1 more thing," I said. He waited. "The flannel," I said. "Non-negotiable. Permanent. Not a discussion." The corner of his mouth moved. Then the whole thing broke open into a real lava laugh. cakes arrived. Genuine and warm unguarded. chocolate. The first Perfect consistency. completely real thing I'd heard from Completely all unreasonable. Claire said the
possible
same
way.
thing. He I said, made a mental note. She said to you bring up the generously on the flannel. way out. Smart Because woman, that waiter I said, had navigated always an has been. Extraordinarily complicated evening with grace and deserved every dollar of it. We ate. We talked. Not about business or history or envelopes or 30-year-old grievances. Just 2 people who were going to have to figure out how to be honest with each other going forward. Taking the first quiet steps in that direction over good coffee and better chocolate. I drove home to Harlan in my 2004 Silverado with the den above the rear wheel well. The Kentucky night moved past the windows, and I let my mind run where it wanted to. I thought about Leonard Briggs. The young man he was in that Lexington office before the choices he made hollowed him out from the inside. I thought about what it costs a person to spend a lifetime inside a story where they are always the victim and never the architect of their own circumstances. I thought about Warren sitting somewhere at night with an envelope full of incomplete records and a narrative with structural damage he hadn't anticipated. I thought about what it cost a son to see his father clearly for the first time at a restaurant table. I thought about Claire, who had called me that afternoon while I was driving to Harrington's and said, "Dad, please don't be weird tonight." And I had said, "I am never weird," and she had said, "That is the weirdest thing you have ever said." My phone buzzed on the passenger seat as I turned onto my road. A message from Marcus. Told Claire everything. She says you're impossible and that she loves you completely and that the flannel is a problem she has given up trying to solve. I smiled at my phone in the dark cab of my truck. Type back. Tell her the flannel was here before she was, and it will be here after all of us are gone. I set the phone down, pulled into my driveway, sat for a moment with the engine idling, looking at my house. modest and warm and lit from inside, because Claire had stopped by earlier that day and never in her entire life remembered to turn off the kitchen light before she left. Somewhere across town, Warren Whitfield was sitting with an empty envelope and a story that no longer held its shape. And I was home. Some men spend their whole lives building things to prove something to someone, to the people who doubted them, to the partners who betrayed them, to the version of themselves that started with nothing and needed the world to know it had arrived. I built Callaway Ridge for a different reason entirely. I built it to protect something. My daughter. My name. The people who worked for me and trusted that I would still be standing when everything got difficult. The version of myself that looked Leonard Briggs in the eye in that Lexington office and chose a harder, slower, lonelier road to start over clean rather than the easier road of burning everything down on the way out. I built it because building something real, something that lasts, something that means what it says it means, is the only revenge that actually holds its value over time. Warren Whitfield came to Harrington's tonight with documents and a 30-year grudge and a plan he had been rehearsing for longer than I want to think about. He left with nothing but the truth. And the truth, as it turned out, had always been mine. I got out of the truck, walked up to my front door, and went inside to turn off the kitchen light. Some things you just have to do yourself. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that what you build with patience and integrity is always stronger than what someone else tries to take with strategy and spite, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Dad's Silent Revenge. Drop a comment below and tell me what part hit hardest. I read every single one. I will see you on the next one.